Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into the secret history of Washington, D.C. And let me tell you, it's a story of sacred rituals, bitter political deals, and a trial by fire that nearly wiped the city right off the map before it even really began.
All right, so here's what we've got on tap. We're going to start with a pretty strange ceremony on the banks of the Potomac, then get into the backroom deal that picked the spot in the first place. We'll see the first stones laid, watch the city nearly collapse on itself, survive a catastrophic fire, and then finally explore how the Capitol became this kind of modern temple for a new nation. Let's get into it.
So you might think a story like this starts in some stuffy congressional hall, right? Nope. Our story begins outside a popular tavern in Alexandria, Virginia. It's March 15th, 1791, and a whole procession is getting ready to lay the very first stone of the new federal city, kicking the whole thing off with a deeply symbolic and ancient ceremony.
To really get what was going through the minds of the key players here, you have to look at their inspiration. This verse, right from the Book of Kings. See, they didn't think they were just building a city. They saw themselves as modern-day Solomon's builders, literally putting up a new temple for a new kind of nation. And this idea was absolutely central to the Freemasons who were leading the charge.
So you had these Masons, and we're talking about big names, people who signed the Declaration of Independence, and they all marched down to Jones Point on the Potomac. And there, the master of the lodge started this very precise two-part ritual. First, they tested the stone with a square, a level, and a plumb, which to them were powerful symbols of virtue, equality, and morality, just to make sure it was, in their own words, well-formed, true, and trusty.
Now this second step, this is where you really see the spiritual weight they put on this moment. Once that stone was proven to be perfect, it was consecrated. They sprinkled it with corn for plenty, poured wine for health, and then anointed it with oil for peace. This was way more than just a simple blessing. It was a direct appeal for divine favor over the whole project, its builders, and everyone who would one day live there. But before any kind of grand temple could be built, a really fierce political battle had to be won. The chosen location, well, it was hardly a paradise. In fact, opponents called it a howling, pestilential, and malarious swamp. It was a place so unhealthy that British sailors actually believed its fogs carried deadly fevers. Yikes!
The whole debate over where to put the capital basically split the young country right down the middle. You had the Northerners, focused on trade and finance, who wanted the capital to stay in a developed city, like Philadelphia. But the Southerners, led by heavy hitters like Washington and Jefferson, insisted the seat of government had to be in the South. It was a huge battle of regional pride and raw political power.
So how did they solve this? Not on the floor of Congress? No, this was all settled over a private dinner. In 1790, two bitter rivals, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, struck a bargain. Jefferson, who absolutely hated the idea of a powerful federal bank, agreed to back Hamilton's financial plan. And in return, Hamilton delivered the Northern votes they needed to put the capital permanently right on the banks of the Potomac.
Okay, so the political deal is done. Now for the really hard part, designing a capital city pretty much from scratch. But this wasn't just about putting up buildings, it was about creating a powerful symbol for this brand new republic.
George Washington hired this guy, Pierre Charles L'Enfant, a French military engineer who'd actually served with him in the war. And L'Enfant's vision was honestly audacious. It was inspired by the grand capitals of Europe, but on a massive American scale. He planned for a president's house and a Congress house on two big hills, all connected by this grand boulevard, what we now know as Pennsylvania Avenue.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. You've probably heard theories that the city's layout has hidden Masonic or occult symbols, right? Well, the source material is super clear on this. It's pure fantasy. Yes, Masons were involved in the ceremonies, but the main designers, including L'Enfant and Thomas Jefferson, they weren't Masons. Seeing secret patterns in the map is described as nothing more than a colossal Rorschach's test.
But there is one detail that totally reflects Masonic tradition, and it's the date on the Capitol's cornerstone. The year of Masonry, 5793. So where does that come from? It's from the Anno Lucis, or Year of Light calendar. Back in the 1700s, Masons started adding 4,000 years to the current date, based on a popular calculation for when the world was created. It was their way of giving their whole fraternity this air of ancient, solemn tradition.
So you have all these grand plans and solemn ceremonies, and for its first decade, the new federal city was, well, it was an absolute disaster.
We're talking a muddy, unfinished, and just deeply unpleasant place to live and work. Get a load of this number. It's staggering. By 1803, the city was failing so badly that it was attracting the poor and the desperate. A full 42% of the district's entire revenue was spent on poor relief. Think about that. Out of a population of 4,000, census kickers could only find 15 men they'd even classify as gentlemen. And this quote from a visitor at the time just says it all. The so-called city was just a few government buildings scattered across a swampy landscape, with roads that were barely even cleared. There's one story about congressmen getting lost in their carriage all night in the bogs and gullies, completely unable to find their own boarding house. The new capital was a total national joke.
Washington's fortunes weren't turned around by slow, steady progress. Oh no, they were forged in a single, catastrophic night of fire and destruction that really threatened to end the entire American experiment.
So it's the War of 1812. A British force is marching on the capital. After just steamrolling the American troops at Bladensburg, they walked right into an abandoned Washington on the evening of August 24, 1814, and they just systematically set fire to the president's house, the Capitol, and other government buildings. The very next day, a storm that was basically a hurricane swept through, putting out the fires, but collapsing a lot of the already damaged buildings.
But right in the middle of all this chaos, there was this moment of incredible heroism. Dr. William Thornton, who was the original designer of the Capitol, he came back to the burning city and he confronted the British soldiers who were getting ready to torch the U.S. Patent Office. He argued that destroying the models of inventions inside was a sin against all of humanity, that they were destroying ideas that belonged to the whole world. And, moved by his plea, the British major actually spared the building. And here's the incredible irony. The British attack, the thing that was meant to humiliate the young nation, it had the exact opposite effect. The destruction gave America this powerful rallying point. Out of the ashes rose a new sense of national purpose, and all that talk about abandoning the miserable capital, it ended, forever. The city was now a symbol of resilience.
And so, in the final chapter of this story, the rebuilt city evolves into something new. Over time, Washington became the center of what you could call an American civil religion, with its own unique temples, its own scriptures, and its own holy relics.
You can see a perfect example of this in the design of the National Archives, the building that houses our nation's founding documents. Its architecture deliberately echoes the description of King Solomon's temple. The display case for the documents looks like the Ark of the Covenant. It's flanked by two massive columns that are reminiscent of Jachin and Boaz, and it was originally built on 3 symbolic steps, just like in a Masonic lodge.
And this design, it's not just for show. It points to a really fundamental American idea. See, the nation's founding wasn't based on ancient myths or divine kings. It was based on legal documents, words written on parchments by pretty ordinary men. The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution became the nation's sacred scriptures, its holy relics, and they are enshrined in this new temple of reason.
So in the end, the story of Washington, D.C. is really the story of America in miniature, isn't it? It's a tale of these lofty, almost sacred ideals that come crashing into a harsh, muddy reality. It's about an experiment that was mocked, nearly abandoned, almost destroyed, only to be reborn from the flames with an even stronger sense of purpose. Which kind of leaves us with a question to think about. What does the difficult, fiery birth of the Capitol tell us about the character of the nation itself?